think obviously, as you said, and other people have said, Tim Scott is running for vice president. And he's signaling to the white conservative Republican base that he's one of you, that he is willing to go to Fort Sumter, the place where the Confederates launched the war against the Union, and to launch his campaign
Treason.
there.
Treasonous. They were treasonous,
The
Keith.
racist traitors who launched a slave defending campaign against the Union. He goes to that site to a black man in 2023 to go to that site to launch his campaign. I can imagine his grandparents are rolling over, or great grandparents are rolling over in their graves to hear one of their descendants speaking this way. And the tragedy of this is, as we all know, is that the Republican Party is defending to this day the Confederate flag and the Confederate heritage. Just a few days ago, Mississippi's Republican governor signed a declaration declaring Confederate Heritage Month in the state of Mississippi. And that is the party that Tim Scott represents. And so, it's ridiculous. This is what the Republican Party has become, the party of white people. And the only way he can win is to be more white than the white people who are already there. So he has no chance of winning an election. He knows this. The only way I see he even has a chance of winning the nomination is if Trump somehow gets imprisoned and is locked up. Then Ron DeSantis somehow is caught up in the scandal, and Mike Pence is caught up in the scandal, and then Joe Biden resigns and Kamala Harris becomes vice president. And at that point, then the Republicans might decide, oh yeah, we need a black guy. But besides that, this is a fool's errand. The only purpose is to set up Tim Scott for the bootlicking for either Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump as their vice president.
But this is how the GOP does. They lift up their black elected officials always in reaction to what's happening on the other side. So, and I adore Michael Steele, I really do. But President Barack Obama becomes president. What do? They make Michael Steele the RNC chair. Michael Steele was qualified to be the RNC chair before Obama became president, but that's what they do. There's several examples. One recent example, Senator Warnock is the first black Democrat elected in the South. They bring up Herschel Walker. And with this, I think they want South Carolina Senator Tim Scott because there's Kamala Harris. And they want those two to go at it together. It literally is in reaction. But you're right. The vile history of this all. In case folks don't know, for years, black folks weren't even allowed to fight in the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln wouldn't even let black folks fight in the Civil War. Frederick Douglass calls the Civil War the white man slave rebellion. I mean, this was a war on whiteness. This was a war on owning black people. And the reason why Lincoln, in many ways, didn't want black folks to fight in the Civil War is because he knew if he did, it would make the war about slavery. And in his brain, he's just trying to act like, oh, it's about the Union, just keeping the Union together. And so when black folks come to fight, the only reason why the North wins the Civil War is because of the manpower of black soldiers who knew freedom was on the line. And so to see South Carolina Senator Tim Scott at Fort Sumter, Frederick Douglass would be mortified. Amisha Cross?
I mean, we have to remember that Tim Scott is doing what Tim Scott needs to do to appeal to the greater white base. He's not trying to appeal to black people. He's not trying to appeal to diverse voters for the most part. He's counting on his personal race, the skin that he's in, being as much diversity as he needs to be able to pull on some voters who haven't paid attention to his voting record. But beyond that, this is more than just the Republican Party choosing black to compete with black. This is also Tim Scott choosing a moment to elevate Tim Scott. Let us not forget that. We already saw Nikki Haley jump out front, also a South Carolinian. I honestly believe Tim Scott was going to jump out before her. Tim Scott has been fundraising for quite some time now around this. There are, whispers among the Reagan Republicans that Tim Scott is basically their shining star. They've been looking forward to him announcing for quite some time. And he is going to operate as the the anti-Ron DeSantis, he's hoping to operate as the anti-multiple indictments, multiple impeachments, Donald Trump. On that same token, he doesn't want to get in the mud and fight Donald Trump, which I would say nobody on the Republican Party who is trying to be a contender in this primary wants to fight Donald Trump, which is always interesting. They want to sidestep that and go straight to attacking the Biden-Harris agenda and President Biden without having to actually talk about the people who they've got to get through the primary and defeat before they could ever face President Biden in general. But I do think that history is going to hurt Tim Scott in many ways. He doesn't want to face it, but we quite frankly have to. We see what's going on in Tennessee with the ousting of those two Tennessee Democratic leaders, one of which has now been reinstated. We're seeing, as Keith pointed out, we're seeing what's happening in Mississippi. We're seeing what's happening with the Republican Party writ large and how they've refused strongly to speak out against some of the culture war narratives that are not popular, by the way, amongst voters of any party. And it is something that I think that Tim Scott wrestles with, because on the one hand, he wants to have that long entrenched Republican love fest. But on the other hand, he does not want to isolate certain parts of that base because he recognizes those people come out. Those people are the folks who literally gave voice to the rise of Donald Trump and Trumpism that exists whether Trump is in office or not.
But Amisha, I hear you when you say that Tim Scott is not trying to get black voters. I mean, I believe it was Rep. Stacey Plaskett, hope I'm saying her name right, when Tim Scott dismissed there was a voter suppression issue. Rep. Plaskett said, you know, black people didn't vote for you, which actually the data is there in South Carolina that they didn't. But as far as high numbers, I understand that. But is there no bottom? I mean, to be at Fort Sumter. I get you don't want to get black voters. I get you don't want, but to be at Fort Sumter, the Confederacy, you are a black man in South Carolina. You talk about Jim.
But he has to prove to white people that he can also be one of them. He cannot be the black hardcore civil rights Republican. I don't think any black Republican can. He has to prove to them that he's also aligned.
Fort Sumter? Like, that is egregious.
I'm not saying it was the greatest choice in the world. I am saying that it has its historical relevance. He was going to make it quake in the news. He wanted to have more attention than, again, Nikki Haley, former governor there, also former ambassador under President Trump. He is the only one. This is the only shape up we've seen where you have two people, most recently from the exact same place in terms of South Carolina, who are running in the same primary. That is extremely rare. So I think that in his case, he's also trying to up the ante and separate himself from Nikki Haley, whom politically they're pretty closely aligned. And he's also trying to make himself seem like a strong candidate in a field that is still being made. We still haven't heard from all the contenders yet, and one in which he does not want to go by the wayside, like certain other candidates who have already been acknowledged. And I think that in his case, again, he's not trying to recruit or stand by black voters. This is the same guy who fought tooth and nail against the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and basically put a pin in Cory Booker's balloon on it. He doesn't care about the black vote. He doesn't need the black vote to win.